today? Oh, no sound. Do I get the sound here?
Oh no, it was me.
Okay.
Yeah, people are late, so I just thought I would jump on
Oh,
and
they're late. That's good.
get
So
some.
as you see that, if I may say that Spiro is in Mary's side store, a private store called Minetta. And he's now introducing yoga there and maybe iPad speaking and stuff like that into the place.
Nice.
But as you look around it, you can also see
Oh, it's nice.
how beautiful the space is.
Yeah, it's great.
And so then,
Nice.
I'm gonna go take care of the plants,
Yeah,
but I'll be
Very
there.
soon.
okay. So that's Mary's things, and we have some collectibles there. And Seth has become really good at bag making and belt making, and personally, and in that craft. And I think that I don't know if Segway has his own thing going, but he has making 3D silverware and what else has he jumped into now? He's baseball cards thoroughly, but let's see how it goes. And then a few people who, so there's Mary's sister has been making a clothing there that has just really taken off and sold. So individuals will just hang out and see what the space will bring now as. So then Spiro is yogaizing it somewhat by his presence, and downward dog it. He's suggesting everyone do downward dog as they come into the store. So there's a reaction to that idea. What do you say? So that's something that's interestingly happening, but it's just happening as hanging out, more or less. So we'll see if it's there's some art hanging there, and but not having the idea of a hangout business where the business is a byproduct of more of a friendly happening is naive. But I think that's what business originally was anyway. It was more trading and neighborhood interactions and stuff like that, as I remember. But independent of that, not to be so naive, you understand that the literal world of money making is driven. And then it allows scheming to be normal, as normal planning. But when you look at the planning, you see it's scheming in some way. When you look at the landlord's what you have to sign in this, you see it's like a scheme that fits the landlord, but not you. The landlord, even if you get shot, you still have to pay the landlord the rent, even if, So somehow there's a landlordism that you have to sign that knows it's a kind of bondage inherently. In order to secure the moment, you have to sign over a literal future that you don't realize it's the future until you get there and realize it, So it's remarkable when you're in the systems, but it's still a creative act for you in the systems. But when it becomes systemic, it waters down everything to rent money.
Mm.
And so it suppresses everything else in life as if it's crazy because you have to earn money or something like that. When all these things, once they become suppressed, they start to become, they can't express themselves. They have to have a hidden life. So one perceives that somehow, what's the philosophy again? Do you have shape to a philosophy, or do you feel it's somehow, well, how do you see it? Is there a literal, we could call it darshan yoga, which means that somehow you've created something physically in yourself to be with something. And in being with it, it kind of reveals itself. And so there is not once it takes shape, it starts to take structural philosophy, but it is not really philosophical, literal that way. It's not rules on how you should be. The rules on how you should be literalized, you understand, once there are rules on how to be, there will be rule breaking just in normal living. Once they tell you what you can't do, and it's a normal human thing, and you have to hide it, then the hidden life becomes the reality for you that you have to hide and protect. So it's amazing when one's life is revealed on how many levels it's being lived. And once it's revealed, it ceases to be underground or hidden or whatever. It's kind of an act somehow releases something that was hidden in plain sight. But something in the story, and that usually is indicated as a kind of love feeling or shared feeling or something like that, where the person is a mirror. And so the premise was somehow a mirror effect, that some relationships created a mirror effect that allowed you to see something that was hidden in plain sight, how it looked, how your life looked, if it was filmed throughout the whole time, just normally. And it didn't make any comment, and film didn't say anything, but you just saw the life that you've lived. And you see a holy shit moment hidden in plain sight. And in many cases, you can see, holy shit, the people never met before. In the literal world, it blocked them. They met each other in dreams and in memory and things like that. But they couldn't meet in the moment. And we're faced with that in our literal life. That somehow the literalness of the existence becomes the actuality of it. When you start to see that the literalness of the existence was hiding this whole other creative dimension. And that when you discover it, your eye releases the story from your possession. And you see at the same time that you've had a literal life and you had the experiences of being in a literal life, you also see in retrospect that it was more of a mystical life or a kind of spiritual life in some way, more than it was a literal life. It was hidden in a literal situation. But your access to actually the experience of it, you see that much of the reactions that one has in the literal story is sparing them from a broken heart. But that somehow there's a moment where the broken heart is not literally you having a broken heart as a psychological act or something, but a broken heart is very much a part of being alive. Where the broken heart is not your possessor, but the broken heart, again, has the perspective of the mirror looking out into the story, and it sees the broken heart from a different place. What the person refuses to experience and resists in all ways is the death experience in the life experience. But then in the experience, from the author's perspective, we'll say, you see the broken heart is a device of the story of experience where you see what happened. And when you see what happened, somehow the story is released from your ownership. And you see it's only been a journey. And that you've assumed these identities in every of the experience. And that every time that you've assumed identity, there's a whole body of experiences waiting for you. Because then once you've assumed an identity as this or that, then the identity was also silently falling away. You then see the assumption of identity in order for there to carry out a status quo of life. But then you also understand that for us now, the taking on whatever we're doing in life now, we're doing. So it is a full creative act for us to be doing what we're doing, even though everybody else seems to be normal doing what they're doing. We're not exactly normal that way. We're doing normal in some way. And everyone kind of really knows that. Sometimes they get pissed off with that, and sometimes they cherish that, you know. And you can even see the motives with getting pissed off with it, you know, because it's, even though it's about nothing, and almost everything will be about nothing, seemingly. But there is a feeling that runs through the story. And sometimes experiencing the feeling is awkward in the literalness of the story, if the story is around survival and the experience is around feeling. In other words, we're not somehow living a life that has survival without the feeling, like the feeling somehow dictates the survival, not the survival dictates the feeling. And I said, what does that mean? That somehow it comes from an authentic place in you. The feeling to, as we kid around with joy or ourselves, the feeling to live, expressed in getting new teeth or whatever the situation is, but you see the underlying premise, you see almost a conversation going on in the brain. It's should I or shouldn't I? Shall I do this? You see it's weighing time and space, it's making a measure. It has so many, it's almost a scientific experiment what's going on in the brain, where the question literalizes, and then you'll bring common sense. Well, don't do this, don't do this. But you see, it's a kind of, and it's employing dreams. Dreams meet common sense. New teeth with 1 year at this age, and the ball busting pain of flying around and having to get the new teeth done and this and that. Okay, at this age. Okay. So you see the brilliance of it. Hidden in the dumbness of it is the brilliance of it, that this dialogue is going on. It's taking the shape of teeth, but the dialogue is around living and not living. And it's almost a reflection, a mirror reflection of the immune system and what is happening to it. But the question outwardly is, should I get the teeth? I don't know. Okay. But the immune system is speaking in some way through you. Now, is the immune system saying, should I get the teeth? Should I? Okay. Is it, so the immune system says, look, how much longer do you want to be around? Okay. So can it be that the person is a reflection of a process that is happening to them? And to the person's mind's eye, it manifests as should you get repaired and should your body get repaired? Is it worth the hassle? Should you go out in the world? There is a kind of self-maintenance going on. You see a remarkable thing going down. And you'll see almost all the experiences that will come out of it. About nothing. But the fact is that we're living and dying simultaneously. And you get evidence in different ways of living and dying. In certain years of your life where it may not always be physical, the living and dying, then it may be the love affair you're in, the situation you're in, may be living and dying simultaneously. And you have glimpses of it. And in the glimpses of it, you somehow create a creative life for yourself in some way, where it's not so literal, where a job is not literally a job, but more creative projects, relationships open up doorways creatively. And in that, you see that creativity is happening simultaneously to the literalness of survival. So even when relationships are trying to survive together, when you're looking at it from the lens of the audience, you're seeing a creative process going down while they're seeing a survival process going down. From the audience perspective, you're seeing the inner workings of the situation and how the people in it will experience it in time, but it is happening in the present. And so that's how we'll experience a dying process. We'll experience a dying process. And we'll experience the dying process as the dying process in time. When the life is sort of removed from your ownership of it, you see a creative process has been happening in your life all along. And when you have moments of meeting that, it frees the story from being the literal story. You see the life itself as dimensions of being a creative story that becomes literalized. And as it becomes literalized, the literalization of it thinks of itself as the fact. Even though it has ideas of God and love and beyond and this and that, it still thinks of itself as the fact. Oh, there's Kerry coming on. Hi, Kerry. So we've just floated around a bit. I'm coughing here, but we've had smoky days here and fires surrounding us, a bit like Santa Rosa, I guess. Have you had that in Boulder also, Erja?
We have had a few fire. We have had two nights of rain. We're very happy.
Yeah, we have no water at all here. Yeah. So it's interesting, but it's more around us. We haven't felt the immediate impact of it, but what we have felt is the smoky air.
That's bad, yeah.
So we'll see, but we'll get we got a couple of these air purifiers for a moment, but I don't know. We'll see how that is. You've had that before up there, didn't you? Where there was smoke coming into the town.
Oh, yes.
But amazingly, the towns around us, they've evacuated. But we haven't had, they don't tell us, what about, you say, well, what about Santa Fe? Should we do? And they don't say anything. You know, even though it's supposed to be 20, 30 miles away, something happened, yeah. And as we were kidding around before, you're supposed to, they tell you what you're supposed to have and be prepared to evacuate. But I don't know if they said that in Santa Fe. And I kind of think that we leave ourselves dumb anyway. Just like Kai, just like as the vaccine and not vaccine, and this, we kind of, should you get ready for the fire? Should you prepare the truck? Get everything. And I say, you know, maybe tomorrow we'll get some. Okay. So you understand that maybe tomorrow is, to me, not entirely dumb. It's that this kind of panic movement that literalizes the situation, where I imagine the movie I'm going to be in. Tomorrow I'm going to be fighting a blaze with a hose, and I say, okay. Or what will I be on? Okay. So almost any imagination, I don't think I'll be doing that anyway. Okay. So what do I think I'm doing? I say, well, make sure everybody's okay, and probably catch you later. I think I get out of here and see what to do. I don't know. We'll see what to do. Is that too dumb? Now, we did get flooded once because of that. But the flooding was more because of
That was scary.
the machinations of the neighbor
Oh,
who had a horse, who just put a horse thing out there.
yeah.
And then, so pushed any water that would have come to their property onto our situation. Okay.
So awful. That's just really,
Thanks, neighbor.
it's really bad.
Yeah.
Well, it was, they say, so the guy, I think I heard him say you got to know your own land and what to do or something. And I know that ranch shit, they talk that ranch shit. I said, no, I thought that neighbors look out for each other, not plot against each other and scam and scheme against each other. So my feeling is you can give me that hillbilly shit, but hillbilly meant that you were looking out for your neighbors, not that you were Mother Jumper. So it was interesting conversation about the thing, but of course we're naive. But then when the well ran dry and you then had to then apply for a license to go deeper, then you understood the whole scheme of the place that you were in. They were buying water rights. It was even more important than land rights, was to own the water, because that becomes the major thing out here, is the water rights and how far you can dig. And so when I applied there, and they said it will have it done in 2 weeks if you sign it, and I signed over the rights.
Mm.
So then a guy came up to me, he says, don't sign over your rights. He started to whisper to me,
Mm.
they try to get you to sign over your rights. I had to pay $750 to get my rights back.
Wow.
I didn't even know what my rights were, but then I found out that almost everyone in the area knows water rights pretty well.
Mm.
So it is a kind of, you step into a situation that's pre-existing. But they say that the state is always trying to get the water rights back from you.
Did you sign him over?
I signed them over, but I had to pay 700. When I found out that I signed them over, I didn't know.
Oh.
It was like the other day I told you that I went to get glasses so I can go take the test for the motor vehicle. And they said that you're too old to get glasses. Thanks very much. And they're probably right. So then as we drove past the motor vehicle place, we said, okay, let's take a shot. And I got it without glasses. My eyes were working pretty well. And okay. So let's say it's weirder and weirder. Where you're actually living, you're doing things, you're going about, and you're not living simultaneously. I'm too old to have glasses. Well, holy shit, you're probably right. I'm too old to have teeth like that also. So then I say, holy shit seems to be the case, where what would be dreadful is a kind of joke that you're in. Where the element was, and the person is making a joke with you, but you don't exist in some way. That you in our framework of insurance and things like that, we would be crazy to insure someone like you. And I say, why? And they say, why? Take a look in the mirror, and they say, why? And they say, would you insure yourself? And then I have to say, probably not. And then they say, would you do an operation on yourself then? Look at you. I say, probably not. So then I say, will you do a vaccination on? No. If it's a sweetheart thing, I'll go with it, but I'm not in the political shtick of it. The doing or the not doing isn't as important as where I'm coming from. So basically, I'm not, if fear comes into the picture, fear is not is a symptom of something else that's happening. And that means that when there is a kind of fear that comes, you push it to some side of being the physical aspect, but that the fear is also revealing creatively something else is happening. It's a different question that's happening. So when a fear is that great, it pushes aside the literalness of it. There's something that's happening. And you see that you're managing something in your life. and there's some decisions coming your way that are conflicting with the management of what you're doing. And so therefore you have to kind of manage some grace in the situation. But somehow the chief element in you is the grace. You're still, it's like you're, and so it's likened to a pregnancy of some sort. You're caring for that even instinctively without even knowing fully. But now you have seen how philosophically the life has been lived, and you see that you're caring for something. And in the outer surface, it's caring about this or literal, but it's a deeper sense of it. And you see that a feeling has given you a life. And even in the loss of the situation, the feeling is still given. So the absence of, the memory of, the feeling for. One is living almost the creative aspects of their life while they're in it. And you see how determined each of us are to have the experience. So in our meeting, it's not don't do this or don't, in terms, it's a perceptive sense of a life creative. And what's creative? What's the integrity of that life being lived? So I think that integrity in that life as a creative act is discovered, not laid out, or if it's laid out, it's laid out and that you discover it. Much like I may throw a ball against the wall and catch it, or throw against the ceiling, I can catch it with my eyes closed. And I kind of awakened an old thing accidentally. I just threw a ball against the wall and awakened a hidden thing that was 50 or 60 years old, hidden in the body. So then I started to discover that you can awaken, that exercise wasn't literally exercise, but that you can awaken things that were second nature to you now that were hidden in your body, and that becomes more of the exploration. So when you are caring health-wise, health means caring for the intelligence of the situation, and not the intellectual intelligence of it, but your sense of something. So when it literalizes in the world, it literalizes in the world, much as an actor literalizes the situation. Something touches you that allows you entree into a literal world. This is what will happen when you're walking through different cultures or in different situations, and some of it looks pretty horrible in how they treat people in situations, and yet you're walking through it, and I'll catch you later. They're normal, and the objection to it is that so you see something that's hidden in plain sight, and your impression, your sense there has an impression on the circumstance. And in some of those cases, they try to talk you out of being you, or you stumble in a situation, and they say, "Oh, sir, you don't understand. Americans don't understand." And you say, "Okay, I'll see you later then. You have to treat the animal this way, or the child is going to be," and they give you an explanation, and not to put it down. In fact, once you live in those places, anytime you live in a culture that is dominant, that becomes the logic of the situation. You could see even in gangs, you can see in governments, you can see in structures, their logic becomes the reality. And but not in person. Are you okay, Kerry? Well, I mean, if you have pillows like that, you must be okay.
Yeah, life seems to be really blossoming to kind of living in a flow. I've been feeling connected with your energy, I guess, and some of the words that you've been speaking and our talks, and yeah, kind of seeing subtleties in my being and ways in which I've been really, yeah, just interesting relationships.
I feel something similar is happening to everyone we know,
Yeah.
even though it's particular to the person. But somehow, even though what's happening to the individual may be really remarkable at this moment, there are issues floating overhead that are related, that involve others somehow. And that sometimes, and now there's a possibility that they may just, hey, baby, or there's a possibility they'll say, screw you, bastard, you rat, mother, okay.
Yeah.
So that you share the story and you see somehow you can't run into the story and make this happen or therapy. It's not, in fact, both things did actually happen in the literal world. Anytime there's a move of the self over the relationship and it's discovered, it creates an interruption of the feeling because there is an I and thou happening that gives it a life against the logic of a situation. In fact, the logic of the situation will use be parents to say, are you guys crazy? What, the guy doesn't have a job, okay. You understand? Stuff like, so you run into a parental part of the person's brain that you would run into in life. If you did hook up with them, you would run into that parental aspect of the brain. Like, we told you he didn't have a job or something like that. Okay. So a job was somehow essential to the story.
Yeah, I've been meeting people and things have been happening. I may have some work with this kind of lovely person he's getting into permaculture, and he might have offered me some work with him. But it feels very much like there's room for me to be who I am with it.
Well, it seems that's, let's say you have 10 fingers, you may have 10 colors on your palette. Let's say in the creative sphere, it's all a creative sphere for you. You're acquiring somehow an insight into something that the permaculture presumes to be so. And we saw a very wonderful thing on, but we lost it there. I think it was on KENW or something. And it was this woman who was probably around 40 something, a European, but she had devoted herself to these plants and the language, and she discovered a whole other language was happening. And in the woods, the whole other language, she was in awe of the conversations that were going on around it, that somehow but they weren't in English and they weren't in language and they didn't have intention. So they said that something, the presumptions that humans knew what was going on, when she started then to reflect on them, and then it was a very nice show. I'll try to find out the name of it there.
What is the name of the woman?
Hmm?
What is the name of the woman?
And that's what I'm trying to, I
Oh.
mentioned it to the shaman yesterday, and he's going to look it up and find it, and also Spiro.
Oh, yes, it sounds interesting.
Has a name, but, well, that one phase of the program where she then showed the plants and her movement and how they were kind of moving in relationship with her. And then as she was walking past the plants in the forest, like they were greeting her. And, she was, so she was attempting to immerse herself in the conversation that was happening that had nothing to do with human logic or reasoning or anything, but that you saw a whole other deep thing going on in the situation that somehow that you could be with.
Yeah.
Now, there were quite a few musicians who tried to explore the so-called silence. Because they say, why? Because the ear literalized the music into actual literal music being played. But that you discovered that the literal music being played was part of a sea of music that was already happening. And so this premise was not before, to the literal mind, it was what came before the sound, but in fact, what was happening simultaneously and you saw that there were worlds happening simultaneously, but that every time that you experienced the world simultaneously to the present, there was some change that happened to you, because now you were seeing something that wasn't normally seen, not only normally seen, but resisted.
Mm.
So it would be like seeing someone that you know that's dying and coughing, and you say, hey, maybe you should try. And you say, no, leave me alone. That's okay. That you're seeing something that somehow the person knows, but is managing it, is resisting seeing. But it looks like they're resisting seeing. You see that they have a date with a certain experience that is resistance on one level, but they're keeping a kind of ill health private.
Mm.
What looks like insanity, in fact, has a date with an experience in itself. So it has dual elements to it. If you're caring for it, then you see a kind of weird duplicity of a person who's dying and living simultaneously, and yet they're doing things, or something is happening where they're dying, and when you say, what's going on? You say, oh, nothing, that's okay. And I'll catch you later. And they go in the bathroom and they fall down okay. And they say, holy, what is it nuts? Is it crazy? And I say, a few levels it is, but another level protective of the essence that is somewhat related to the body, but that somehow the essence is measuring its time relationship to the body.
Mm.
So to some extent, you see it leaving the body, or they're almost like a marriage of sorts, that the body and the essence had an agreement, and that they're splitting up. And you see a process going down, but you also see a kind of lag time where you see dying before it dies. And where you see, in fact, that the circumstance died and then may take a year for it to literally end, but it died already. And that's what's happening. They say also in the body that by the time you discover what happened, the happening is really far gone, because you were trying to live the everyday and the normalcy of the everyday and suppressing something else that was happening. So then you become aware of a system that's happening. It's remarkable. That becomes normal. And you see a similar system that is managing the body is also managing the life. And as it becomes aware of it, it's as if it becomes aware of a creative process being the element in life. It tries to take care of its expression. So what you are then having in relationships is that they are in fact creative acts. But then again, as they literalize, the creative dimension starts to disappear, and the literal continuity becomes the dominant factor, neither bad nor good. But that's the norm. As the creative process happens, the freedom of it was its mainstay, that it was not bound to a form, but that the meeting of the minds, the meeting of the beings opened a creative doorway. And even if it was sharing a room, it was a creative doorway somehow that couldn't have happened before without the feeling. So we're exploring a mixed world. There's the logic world of survival, but then survival as it literalizes becomes more of an imprisonment. So that somehow survival as an aspect of the journey deepens the creative aspect of it. Because then you also understand, in attempting to have it within a literal form and still be creative, that has been the challenge. That somehow, that it comes from a place in yourself, your expression. and that it not be so organized to sell or to this or that, but at the same time, that is in the world. Besides, no record companies asking you to sell out anyway, are they?
No, getting a lot of concerts, but no
Yeah.
record deals. But I think that's an
Yeah.
antiquated thing anyway.
Hmm?
Not so much record labels being involved these days.
Did you see that comedian was tackled last night? What's the famous comedian though?
Bill Murray?
No, Chris. No.
Wow.
Chris Rock?
Well, there was Chris Rock showed up at his show, but what was the guy's name? More famous than all of them. That who has a contract with Netflix or something. That black comedian,
Oh, Dave Chappelle?
Dave Chappelle, was tackled on stage by someone.
Oh,
You know, he came on
boy.
stage yesterday there and knocked him down.
Wow.
And then and then all these other comedians, then Chris Rock was there. So Chris Rock came up to him and says, "That wasn't Will Smith, was it?" And they have it on tape there. So they were all kidding around on stage about him. It was very scary, they say, for all of them. So I just walked past and they showed that happening. That the guy ran right into him and just knocked him down on stage or something like that. And then security guys came and were beating the guy up really badly. And supposedly the guy had a knife or a gun or something.
Oh, my God.
But we'll still find out later. But then Chris Rock and others came up, and Chris Rock made that comment, and he was joking, and they were laughing at it. They were all laughing at the whole experience. So what do you make of it? We're just to observe this world unfold. The whole idea of Chris Rock and not Chris Rock, or okay.
Seems like we can get caught up in all kinds of stuff.
What stuff can we get caught up in? Let me see. What's happening now? Ukraine, no. Something has shifted.
Johnny Depp and
The
Amber Heard.
abortion,
Oh,
the abortion
yes.
revelation, the preparation for that it was revealed or something. And some say, hold it, you're making the fact that it was revealed the important issue, when in fact that is revealed was showing that you guys are plotting to do this. And it's out in the open now that you're plotting to do this. So it may be more difficult to do it out in the open when your procedures are revealed. And I say it's always difficult to make a judgment if the procedures are revealed while you're doing it. They may be revealed in time. And I say, why? Because if it's revealed, they see that you already have decided on something and now you're trying to organize how to do it. And the premise of the justice is that you don't have a predisposition, but that you're looking for the justice of a situation. Then they say, right, lots of luck. So somehow we know that it's bullshit. At the same time, it represents something that's supposed to be a kind of honorable thing, and yet we know it's bullshit. And it would be as if your son wants to be an altar boy or something like that, and you're hearing about these priests, and you say, holy shit, can they go into that even with such honesty? And you say, what the hell? And the world is organized that way. Is it?
I wouldn't let my son.
Yeah,
No.
I don't know how organized I feel in
But then also, if you see that even medically, that once you see how organized it is into a business, before you get even to see the doctor, you have to go through all these people that are out there that are governing this, managing that, doing this, and managing the circumstance for you. So you see that the information that you're giving is business information. to some way, because there is a business aspect to it. It is a business. And you see somehow where sometimes when you want it, it's really a money-making business in some ways. But it's also the guy may do, when I go in for an operation or something, the guy may do 10 operations a day. So it's even blindfolded, he's doing the operations or whatever, and it's automatically set up. But then you kind of find a way to work with it where you're getting the information that you want for what you're doing. I feel Marty is doing something like that. He knows enough medically to understand where the treatment is beneficial and helpful and natural, and when it starts, and where there's a trade-off. And they say, well, what is the trade-off? And they say, well, in some medical treatments, there's a trade-off of the sensitivity towards the survival. And that's the norm, that there's a trade-off. And so you're trading off time or space or something like that. And it becomes part of the normal conversation, but not said, but the normal conversation. So treatment then becomes the norm as part of the continuity. That I feel is managing, and most of us will manage when you get into such a space where you're logically doing some treatment, but you're not fitting into the logic of the system so much. So then you'll start to feel in yourself what seems like a flaw or not, but I still feel that it's the body speaking, and that there are parts of the body that start to resist, or almost in almost every circumstance, parts of a circumstance will start to resist the continuity. Whether it's in the body, whether it's in the family, whether it's in the neighborhood, whether it's in the circumstance. But that, so I feel that when we were talking about somehow body being sensibility, that takes many shapes and many forms. As you look through many religious practices, you see body being sensibility running through it. And we then come to our own experience where we have things where we see what was really happening in the religion to those who are deeply involved. There's a body being experience taking place. The majority were just looking to it for how to behave. But you also saw that those who were deeply touched by it had a body being situation that had a different language to it. So marriages were not that normal. Getting jobs were not that normal. Somehow they had a relationship to an energy. When it became organized as a religion, when it was a religious feeling that was deeply in the person, so it kind of made them not so practical for other forms of expression. They then become organized into a church feeling experience or whatever. But at the same time, I still feel that it is a spiritual thread running through the life. And that means that the life is not so organized karmically of what it should do and how it should live and what the life should be. So in some cases, it will be respected as a creative act, the person. But in some cases, it will be punished for being creative. And now I jump into the experience. I say, okay, this is what it means to have the experience of being alive. And you have this whole experience where somehow there's an underpinning of dying and living in the living. And somehow there's a fear in some way where it's brought up at times without knowing it, of dying. There's a fear of dying while one is living, but one is actually seeing something that is happening. So it's the thought of dying that one fears, the literalization of it, of a process that's already happening. So then the life is given the extended premise of itself and the suppression of this other process that's happening within it. But then as one desires a creative life or a spiritual life, whatever that means, they've interrupted the continuity and they explore dimensions that are kind of hidden in the literal world because it interrupts the literalness of it. Those who feel deeply and explore the feeling interrupt the status quo of the situation because then somehow their presence makes, just by their presence, makes the situation they're in reflect deeper than it normally wants to do if it wants to survive. But when survival is not the dominant force, but survival is the caretaker of the story, not the owner of it, then it is perceived between the people that their interaction is itself a creative act. And when it loses a creative dimension and it becomes a prison, then you start to see issues will occur. Issues coming out of something that's happening. So not that the issues are to be solved as much as they are to reflect on what is happening. Because you start to see in circumstances, there are, hey baby, again we go back to hey baby moments. Which is happening simultaneously anyway. But there's a hey baby moment, are you still into this? Are we okay? As if you are starting something afresh. Whatever the situation is at the time, that somehow there's an agreement. And so I think that in many cases in our situations, there is a being there for an experience. What do you say? I'll bring it up to you. Derek, what do you say?
Being there for the,
Excuse me.
definitely being there for the experience seems to be part of the essence of what we're even doing here, maybe.
I feel so, that somehow you see the dying of John brought the experience to just a momentary perception of the story was released to some degree. And the thread that ran through it became the reality, because the thread that ran through it was the reality, but could only be perceived in the absence of something. And somehow where the literalization of the relationship is in the way of what it is about. And so the literalization of the relationship is not something that's wrong or right. You see, that's the logic of a circumstance in a literal world. But you see that the literal aspect of relationship is only one part of it. That becomes its organizing principle, its concerns or whatever, but you see the underlying premise to that was a feeling that gave it a reality. In the loss of the feeling, the determination to continue the form takes on more of the characteristics of survival in the face of things, but it's still a creative act. Yet the people are somehow out of their own creativity. In other words, it will be discovered. Even though it's seen in the moment, it will be discovered in time. That one had parallel dimensions happening in their everyday. So I feel where you get glimpses of living and dying in the circumstance. It's not so much a challenge of should you do something about it. It's the seeing of it has you kind of living in a climate with it. Hmm? And you see that somehow there is a genuineness that you're related to. And that somehow throughout the life there has been a kind of relationship to a feeling that has been very much there in the life. Its elusiveness, its presence, its absence. And that you see there has been a whole study of this experience in one's life. Who am I? What is happening? What is going on has been the journey. And it seems not to be a literal question. A question that literalizes, but the literalization of it is not the thing itself. Once you're in the creative process yourself, you see that you're having a relationship to the mystery, and it's called the audience. But somehow the response of the audience, no matter how much you try to calculate it, has a purity to it that affects the circumstance. So we'll say almost in religious presence, that audience was there as a godlike energy or a relationship to a godlike energy. And if you heard it clap its hands at you, if you heard it jeer, if you heard it cheer, if you heard it, you were having a kind of contact with something, even though it was invisible to you. It could see when you were genuine. Somehow acting became acting as if you were genuine. And so you had to immerse yourself into a process of how to be genuine. And immersing yourself in the studies of how to be genuine in your expression, you almost had to be genuine because the audience can see then the move. So let's say you are having a dialogue creatively with an energy that can't be persuaded so easily and doesn't lay out a particular rule, but that you have a sense of something creatively. And then you also understand to what extent your relationship to that feeling is your navigation through the literal world. And again, for us, the religious being is different from the religion that has rules laid out. For us, the exploration of life means itself to be somehow a religious thing is happening while a normal thing is happening. And so there are moments in a situation which create a kind of deep reflection that comes close to what they would call not the literal death experience, but a dying experience, where you view your dying as a fact of what's happening. Not evading it or getting rid of it or whatever. You may see something wrong with yourself physically that allows you an access of dying while you're living. But let's say, in fact, you understand that in your creations and the creative life, what you're doing, the dying and living aspect of it, are interactions of notes. You see the creative interactions that come to our brain as dying and living as literalization. But you see the process in the orchestra of living and dying, the interaction. And the interaction itself being an interaction of living and dying. You see a neighborhood being something of living and dying and creating children while it's passing away. You see it. And you see it in yourself. And whatever kind of reaction one may have, it's still happening. To be with what is. Not as a forced situation, but in fact, an aspect, a deep aspect of what is happening is a what is question. To be with what is then to somehow incorporate it into yourself. Not by study, you may do study, but study doesn't allow it. The study may allow you to deepen it. But somehow when you have the experience then becomes part of your expression. And so when it's part of your expression, you will see accidents or circumstances that happen that deepen it. I feel the sense of one's life as a creative process, as it's literal, at the same time, is not so much dependent on the decision maker, although one may employ the decision maker if necessary, but it's not so much based on a decision maker as it is your relationship to a process that's happening in your life or in the life that you're living. And that somehow the life that was so troubling and challenging and this and that, you start to see were challenging and troubling for deep reasons. Because you see the journey of your life. It was attempting to make something out of nothing. You see it's all in memory, the experience that manifests. You see in the literal world, the literalization still has a possessive to it. But you see in the creative world, it releases it from the possessive towards the experience. You see the energy somehow seeks the experience of what it means to be alive. So to the extent that it looks like, why would it seek this? You say, okay, from the energy, you understand exactly. It stepped into situations that had the most challenging elements to them. What do you say, Ursula? Can there be a relationship to this without it becoming, again? Well, of course, it'll be naive again, and okay.
Always, yeah.
When you're speaking to landlords and things like that, it'll be very naive. But let's say, holy shit, could you imagine having with your landlord then this more of a conversation like this? And let's say Derek is the landlord, and I say, and so therefore I was thinking, since our lives are in flux, maybe that the rent should be much less.
I can't pay the rent. You must pay the rent.
Just to inform you, I'm not paying the rent anymore because of the flux of our life. You could take me to court if you wish. I would love to have that experience.
Oh,
But let's say you announce to the landlord and everyone that you're a free person, and they say, go ahead, take me to court and sue an old lady, right, for wanting to live a decent human life. See what the community will say. So you think that Ursula has power? If she walks down there to the owners of the place?
well, with the manager, I had a kind of a existential discussion. We spent an hour, and she said she loved it.
Yes, so then you should ask for more probiotics for everyone.
She doesn't have any power.
Or more juices, no? Okay. What do you think, Derek? Is this far-fetched? Or are we living something like this at the same time that we're normally living?
It does feel simultaneous.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that most of us will have this simultaneity going on where we have a very private happening in our life, and yet we have a literal life that we're living, but somehow we're caring for this private happening. Now, whatever the private, if it's a literal private happening, or as it was years ago where people hid that they were gay, or they thought they were gay, or this was happening, even though everyone knew it, that shared it. Somehow from the larger picture, it had to be this or that. And so people then had to kind of, at the same time that they knew something was happening, they had to go along with something simultaneously. Okay. So let's say that once it's kind of revealed, you see the brilliance of existence is not around survival. It is managing just like the immune system is managing a remarkable, with millions of cells in this, okay, a world unknown that resembles outer space within our own bodies, within our own beings. And we attempt to use our knowledge that can only prevail for a short space, because then when you're in outer space, you are seeing something beyond your literal knowledge. Something has to happen for you to be able to explore it. Because it's not around literally owning the story, it's around seeing something. And seeing something introduces you to a life of avoidance in order to survive. But that there was another dimension of life when it's not around survival being the strong suit. Then you see somehow around exploring the life that you've lived, where some things will come your way, where dreams will come your way, where thoughts will come your way, incidents will come your way. The difference between it being material and immaterial will kind of vanish. If there's an issue happening in your head, then you'll start to see elements of it manifesting. Then you'll start to see the differences, not so much differences between the literal world, the evocative world, the world of the issue of dreams, when the dreams take an issue. But the dream is also another way of looking at the issue from a different place. But it's also conveying to you a moment waiting for you in time and space. To be there for one's life. Not with a gun to your head or this or that, but in fact to experience your own life from the perspective not only of surviving and your own idea of your history, but you get to visit the mystery. And it's news to you, even though it's hidden in plain sight. I feel that there is a being there for this at this point in our life. Whatever the being there for is, whether it's the dying experience, whether it's this, but that there's a moment that if there's a continuity in the picture, it's because everyone's agreeing to it. And I don't know that it has a literal agreement as much as that you can see in the situation that the people are okay. They're into it. So I feel that we're sharing some element of that, certainly in the midst of that, and each of us and everyone I know has their own expression of that happening. But it does seem that there's a similarity running between us all. And it's pretty much an everyday while our life is in flux. Okay, shall we call it a day? Was anyone else on there, Kai?
Jimmy and Sophia and Terry Renner. I
Okay.
said hi. Mhm.
Hello to them. Hi. So, okay, we'll see you maybe Sunday
Thank you,
or
Dan.
Thursday. I'm sorry, I keep on forgetting Thursday night. How are you doing with that Thursday night there, Derek? Do you feel it's okay?
Yeah, it has a different vibe. I feel it has
Yeah.
kind of
Oh,
flow.
each of them have a different vibe. Yeah.
So.
Okay. So I'll see some folks tomorrow night. Kai, thanks a lot.
Thank you,
See
Danny.
you
Thank
again.
you,
Take
everybody.
care.
And